Today's special guest is Vanessa Tierney. Vanessa is a remote tech entrepreneur with expertise in leading global remote teams, co-working, and international remote sourcing models and technology. She is the founder and CEO of Abodoo, the smart work platform where talent meets opportunity. Abodoo is a two-way street that helps both employers and prospective employees discover the best opportunities, people, and companies worldwide. She is also the co-author of the very popular book, Your Company with No Walls, available now on Amazon. Here to talk about remote work, matching people and companies to opportunities around the globe, heat mapping talent, and so much more. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Vanessa Tierney.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So Vanessa is the CEO and co-founder of Abodoo. It is a job placement platform. I'm not going to do a very good job describing it to you. So why don't we have you do that, Vanessa? Tell us a little bit about Abodoo and what you do here in the remote work space.
Okay, so Abodoo is a skills mapping and matching platform, and we provide data intelligence for local governments as to what are the skills of the region, and then for companies that want to connect with people in this new world of work, whether people want to work from home in a co-working space or a hybrid model, they can connect with companies, and businesses can use Abodoo to connect with talent for free. There's no charge.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and I think it's really critical, especially now, I mean, there are a lot of people who, obviously not everybody is cracked up to do remote and not everybody is, interested in staying remote. But I imagine there are a lot of people who had been toying with the idea of going remote who are now going, oh, okay, yeah, this is my new future. This is what I'm going to be doing, now in sort of I guess we can start to call it a post-COVID world that we're living in. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities out there for people who now, had maybe an inkling they wanted to be remote in the first place, or maybe now are considering staying remote. And I think it's really great that there are platforms like yours that can match people together. So can you talk a little bit about how that process goes? Like, let's maybe talk about it initially from sort of the job seeker's perspective, what that looks like if they were to try and use your platform to find remote work, because I know that's going to be a challenge for a lot of folks right now.
Yeah, it will. And when you raise a good point, because when you go remote, you think, well, is this just for a few months? And when I first went remote 10 years ago, I did it for a couple of months and I thought, oh, I don't know if this is for me. I'm a very social person. I love connecting with people. And then you kind of find your flow and you realize, I don't want to give back that 10 hours a week commuting. So I think a lot of people now are going to be looking at their options, especially if companies are saying, well, there's a question about the future of your job, or we want you to be commuting back in next year. And, if you've had more valuable time with family, friends, sports, or just for yourself, you will be looking at options. One thing I'll highlight is we built Abodoo, and the name actually comes from abode, your home, and do being work. But it represents every type of work because a lot of people actually now want that mix. They do want social interaction. However, the idea of like driving into a city versus working in a local co-working space is a lot more attractive. So really it's very simple. Someone will go to abodoo.com/people and they will create a skills profile for themselves. And the idea behind having a skills profile first rather than a CV is the future of job matching, and this is my background for the last 20 years, it's around people's potential and skill set, not necessarily the industry they've come from. And that's more important now than ever because there's some industries in decline, but the skills are transferable. So matching platforms like Abodoo and others will take the skills that you have, is it or work, is it from home, is it in a co-working space, and we'll match you. But one of the key things that we were very passionate about having in place for Abodoo was that 10 years ago, like I faced bias in the recruitment process because I couldn't commute to the city and I was excluded from loads of opportunity. And the idea of like actively going online saying I'm looking, and it doesn't suit everyone. It doesn't suit the people that are not that proactive or social. And so we built a Abodoo that people are anonymous when they register. They're in control of their own profile. When a match happens, they see who the match is, what percentage it is matched against what they want, and then they reveal their age, sex, ethnicity. So hopefully we're helping companies be that little bit more diverse in the recruitment process and broadening talent pools and options for everybody.
Yeah, no, I love that. And there's a couple things that you touched on. One in particular, I think is an interesting thing is this idea that people are basically being matched on skill sets and abilities and background more than necessarily experience in industry, for example. And I think that's particularly key right now, just in that, I mean, whole industries are like popping up right now. Like, how could you have 10 years of experience doing X, Y, or Z, right? It really does have more to do with, you know, your general ability to, you know, rise to an occasion, or that potential that you were looking at. And so I think that that's a really interesting metric. The other thing I think is interesting that you brought up is this idea of, you know, you mentioned, you know, as a remote worker yourself, you know, that you're really social and you really like working socially. And I think it's funny that for years, and sort of in a traditional sense, we've kind of relied on our employers for our social work, right? Because we spend so much time at work that we socialize largely with people we work with, right? And as remote workers, you know, and I'm sure you can relate to this a little bit, I work in and out of co-working spaces and out of my home, and, you know, but I'll go down to the coffee shop and meet a buddy for coffee, or I'll go to the co-working space and I'll catch up with some people that I know from there or whatever. But I'm basically now in a position where I'm doing my own socializing, right? I'm not just having it sort of spoon-fed to me by my employer. And so I think there's something really interesting about that aspect of remote work too, where we can, I guess, kind of take control back, or take ownership of what we want out of a social life. You know, we can do our job and then we can go on and we can do that stuff without depending on work to throw the next big party for us or whatever.
Yeah, and you realize that. I think it's when you hit your 30s and 40s and you think, actually, you know, I know my career, I know my experience. You may be having family at this point in time. Buying that first house could be really important to you, and, you know, your priorities shift. In your 20s, you want the socializing and you want people to set up social evenings and the drink paid for, and, you know, force that connection. But there is a point in time when the company announces that they're going to extend the office and double the capacity. But don't worry, guys, we're going to put in a climbing wall because that's going to keep you excited. You know, you hit a certain age and you're like, really? A climbing wall? That's not going to work. Or a pool table, unlimited food, you know. So I think that you're right. You take back control about how you socialize during the week. And, you know, even if I look at how my week plans out now, I have time to go and do different bits of fitness during the day. Or well, that sounds like I work it every day. I do not. One or two during the week. And like, for me, the most important thing is we've got kids now, and, you know, if the school calls and you come and collect them because one's not well, or even bringing them to school, or you can't put a price on that. You can't say, well, that's worth $10,000 in a salary each year. Mm-hmm. It's actually, you can't put a price on it. I'm seeing them move or walk for the first time, or, you know, and it's that work life. I won't use the word balance. I love like harmony. It's just getting a better sense of like living, because we're only here for a short amount of time.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And it's funny, like, you know, I come from an advertising background. And so a lot of the agencies, you know, you've seen trying to compete for the latest, greatest, the youngest, hottest talent, all this kind of stuff. You know, basically what they do is they start loading place up with ping pong tables and, you know, coffee machines and free lunch and, you know, all this kind of stuff. Right. And sure, I mean, obviously, you know, if you have a workplace that gives you that stuff versus one that doesn't, I mean, okay, you know, those are great perks. But the reality is, you know, they're sort of trying to build the situation that really encourages you to stay at work all the time, right? And so you're talking about this balance or this harmony. And I too hate saying work-life balance just because it's become so buzzy. But ultimately the idea is that, you know, I mean, there's so much life to live outside of our job. And, you know, these jobs, you know, and from my background in advertising especially, these guys, you know, really work hard to keep you at work. You know what I mean? And so, like, I mean, I was consulting for an agency sort of recently, and I remember going through their kitchen, and, you know, I was down there in their office working, and I was looking around and went down to make a cup of coffee, but I was looking at the types of snacks they had. And it wasn't just like a bag of Doritos, for example. It was a bag of chips that were like caffeine boost chips. And then the caffeine boost, you know, coffee, and then the caffeine boost pack of nuts, and the caffeine boost energy drink, and, you know, all this stuff. And I was just like, my God, they're giving everybody all they need to stay here all night. And, you know, and it was one of the things that I noticed that I thought was really interesting when the whole world sort of went remote. One of the big responses that happened were a lot of companies creating these virtual happy hours and things like this, right? Like, they just didn't want to let go and let you go do your own thing outside of work. Now it's our responsibility to hulk up and create these events where you can stay at work just a little longer with your coworkers. And so I thought it was kind of an interesting reaction, but at the same time, I think it's, so critical what you've observed. And I do think it does come with age a little bit, but the, stopping and smelling the roses a little bit.
Yeah, and when people say like pre-COVID, because I've been remote working for so long, and obviously we've been trying to evangelize the idea of like, let people even have a day at home a week, give them that freedom, to empower them, trust them, and that's been the big thing of how can you trust. And human nature is like you can sense if someone is trusting you, and usually the reaction is you will over deliver, you will over compensate in every level, because you feel, well, this person really believes in my authenticity, and and values me enough to give me back my commuting time to have my family and friends. And so I think that it's funny, I'm seeing two kind of types of leaders out there at the moment. The ones that, no, there's three. Ones that were already getting the advantages and the importance of enabling remote even half the time. And then you've got the ones that were so anti it before, and now they're like, this is amazing. How did I not know about this? And they're beginning to see this ripple effect of remote. You go from productivity doesn't drop. Actually, productivity is starting to rise. And then, CFO's doing his numbers, or she's doing his, numbers, and they're like, oh my goodness, we are going to save millions. And then attrition, HR start going, attrition's improving. And, the feedback surveys are getting better. And so it's just like, and then when it comes to the CSR, and the carbon tax, we're paying less because we're reducing emissions. Like there's literally so many ripple effects. But then you've got the leaders that, to be fair, they have spent 30, 40, 50 years doing the daily commute. They have paid their dues, and they're saying, as soon as it's safe, I'm opening this office again, because our business, our industry can only be done face to face. And I would argue, and I question, say there has to be an element, and there's a way of doing a flexible model. So we're in a very interesting time, because you've got these three types of leaders, and for the people that are working for that last leader, I don't know if they're going to hold on to those great talented teams if they have that approach. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. I mean, and it's funny, this is something we've sort of observed even culturally. With my marketing agency side of my life, we have a small team in Barcelona. And, so we spend a lot of time in Spain and trying to understand Spain. And I know for them, like remote work has been a real struggle, and some of it is cultural. And I think some of it is exactly what you just said. There's, sort of this traditional way of doing business that they just have always done it. And so now you're trying to flip the script and all this stuff. I mean, I'm sure there in some parts of the world are infrastructure issues and, technology problems and, availability of assets kinds of issues, security, that kind of stuff. So I'm sure there's lots of reasons, but I've noticed specifically that this sort of a style of management, not only is it just a leadership culture, but it's also sort of a regional or sort of a national culture in some other places.
Yeah, and it's true, and it is culture to culture, country to country. There's such variation, and then you can say it's around connectivity and co-working capacity and so on. But the flip side is we're in a very strange world right now, and there's close to 400 million people who have lost their jobs just in the last 4 or 5 months, and governments and companies are going to have to think about, what can we do to help these people in, industries like hospitality, tourism, retail. Those industries are not going to recover for a long time, if ever, to the level that they were at. I don't know. And so there's a lot of people out there that are now with these skills, and there's two questions you ask. One, are they transferable? And two, can we upskill them and connect them into industries that are thriving? Because that's where the opportunity lies, and it needs to be done,
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And maybe it segues nicely into this topic. So, this is something that gets thrown around a lot. I actually get kind of annoyed with it because I see it so often. But it's this idea of sort of what is the future of work then? And obviously you guys spend a lot of time thinking about this at Abodoo, and you're trying to, I guess sort of facilitate what might be the future of work. And I think, just to sort of build on what we've been saying about sort of cultural leadership and things like that, I think the businesses that are going to thrive the best are the ones that maybe don't keep a toe back in the office, right? So right now, everybody's been pushed to go remote. And I think for so many, there were, folks who had sort of left one toe in the office in grand hopes that they'd be going back. And that intention, or I guess lack of intention, sort of prohibited them from getting all they could out of a remote opportunity. They were busy, sort of doubting or wishing they were back at work, or, oh, this is so much easier when we're just in the office, and sort of maybe taking away from this experience that could have been maybe this terrific opportunity. And so I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about that, just sort of how you see the future of work shaking out. Obviously it'll vary quite a bit by industry, but if you can talk just how it might work as it sort of pertains to remote work, and what business models might look like, and how folks can adapt to move forward.
That's a huge question, and I'll try and simplify it from the perspective of, I think for people, it'll be your right eventually to have a percentage of your week at home if you so wish. If we look, Germany just announced a week ago that it's now law. If that's what you require, you get to work from home. So I think that will become the norm. It'll be a hybrid model. And I think for companies, the way they're going to get ahead is actually biting the bullet and defining what, you can use the phrase smart working model, because it's not office or remote. And hybrid, it's a bit loose. I think smart working model defines a model that's smart for your business, whether it's 4 days from home, 1 day in the office, co-working, flexi time, timeshare, whatever it might be. You define it and you publicly announce it. So it's very transparent. Everyone knows that if I'm gonna work for that company, this is the model that I'm in. So, and there's no come in the door, do your probation, and then we'll give you more flexibility. That'll be gone. What is your model up front? And then for governments, as you know, we're now mapping talent outside of cities, because the next thing that's going to happen is there's going to be this huge mobility of people, not for work, but for living, because a lot of that's commutable to the office. So when you actually start thinking about now, offices not fully reopening, even if you have to go to the office 1 day a week, you could actually live 2 hours away from that office. If you knew 6 days a week, you were living somewhere that you just the best house, best education for your kids, loads of room. So people, for my husband and I, it actually took us 3 years to realize, geez, we could live anywhere. Now that we're remote, it took us 3 years to realize that. I'm hoping other people will realize sooner than that. And so I think this mobility, and the reason we're talent mapping, so we've made Abodoo free. We've made it free for companies to connect with people, and we've been able to do that because we built another platform during lockdown. We've built one for government, and this is where we feed in the anonymized data of skills and where people want to live and work and what type of model they want to be in. And we feed that into government so they can start making strategic decisions around, actually, there's a cluster of 1,000 people that want to live in this location that have this skill. Why don't we build a digital hub? Why don't we build 500 houses? Why don't we do, because we're going to have decentralized countries happening, and it's going to take a few years, but the opportunity actually for regional areas is going to be wonderful. It's never been like this before. As long as a regional area has connectivity, buildings that could be co-working spaces, and people, then they can really revive and they can reboot local economies. And so we're excited about the part we'll play in sort of demonstrating, here's the demand and skill set of this region. Let's bring in the companies.
Well, I love that. So from the, mapping that you've been doing to date, are you finding that there are certain, geographic areas that tend to have a certain skill set, maybe more so than another? Maybe someplace on the coast has the best web developers, or someplace in the central country has the best finance guys, or something are skill sets clustered like that? Or is it, just sort of, are we just trying to gather kind of, I guess, intel for who lives in our area?
It is so random. We're seeing cybersecurity, finance, tech, managers, pharma, fintech, but you'll start to see little clusters, and we can do targeted marketing campaigns for a region and say, look, if you've got technical skills, register, or if you've been abroad and you've got amazing skills and you've moved back, or are you a spouse of someone who's working right now and you thought, actually, because I can't get to the city, I can't work. Or have you got mobility challenges and you've never been able to get to the city for that reason? Everybody should have an equal opportunity now. We should be living in a diverse and inclusive world. And, that is, I suppose, the upside of regional working, remote working, smart working, whatever we define it. Everyone has the opportunity. And as long as we know who they are and we can map. Up until now, most governments have been using census data. And census data, let's face it, it's not telling you exactly the skills that I've acquired last week or the month before. So we felt like it was our duty to be able to give people the opportunity to have a skills profile and really position themselves, not just to connect jobs locally or nationally, but now, globally. San Francisco companies are now looking globally for the best talent if they have remote work models. And that's a mindset shift for a lot of job seekers to take on board.
Yeah, no, that is really cool. And, and it's funny too, because I just think of the opportunity, I have family that come from a very small town in a state just north of here. And, I was up there and I was talking to somebody about a remote work program that exists here in the state of Utah, where I'm at, where basically they go into these small towns and they build a co-working facility, and then they basically recruit people into positions for different companies within these small towns, right? And they're able to make just revolutionary change to the economies of these cities. All of a sudden, these small towns have several people with, gainfully employed. They're making reasonable money, working for good companies, that sort of thing. And it's changing the whole landscape of these little towns that people still want to live in. So many people have been forced into the cities to try and find employment, but ultimately they'd rather be home. They'd rather be where they're from. And so I think of how to leverage something like this technology that allows us to sort of, I guess, get a landscape for, the types of skill sets that might exist in any given market, and then sort of build to accommodate that, right? So, I mean, in our work, for example, if we're trying to recruit creative people, maybe we would find, using sort of mapping technology like you're describing, little pockets of creative people. Maybe they're just outside art colleges, or 1 hour away from where they had to go to university or something. Like, maybe there's some data or some learnings that could be had, but the opportunity to grab those folks then and sort of, put them into these buckets where you could sort of provide a service or generate, some kind of matchmaking relationship with larger organizations. I think could be a real way to change the game for a lot of remote workers.
Yeah, and so you're right. Like, even if I talk about the experience of where we moved in Ireland to a regional area, and like to talk about the connectivity level when we first moved, I had 3 meg broadband. It was terrible, but we moved because we knew it was a lovely location and it was going to eventually get the connectivity. Now it has the connectivity, and we mapped the skills of the area that we're in for the local government, and they successfully landed a US company into the regional co-working space like you described, and they intend to go on and create 150 jobs. And so typically for every job that's created in a regional area, you have 2.5 times service jobs that are created, whether it's the teachers, the nurses, the people serving the coffee. So the economical impact of 150 jobs is just huge. And that's one company who could see the talent. So like, Ryan, I agree, even if it's a handful of jobs, and from an employer's perspective, I mean, I love everyone being virtual, but nothing beats face-to-face. And the model I've adopted over the last kind of 10 years is getting together once a year. And the beautiful thing is, like, because you're not spending lots of money on high rents, rates, commuting, tickets, all of that, you can actually invest in getting together in a really great way and having like a mini holiday together. And a lot of people have asked me over the years, oh, what about the bond? It's not the same as being in the office, the water cooler experience. I'm like, hell no. I know all the husbands and wives, the kids, the pets, and then you get together once a year and it's like a mini holiday. I feel since I've gone remote, I'm actually closer with the people that I work with than I would have been before. So it just shows the shift, really.
Well, one of the things I think that really contributes to that anyway is and maybe I'm off base, but it feels to me like there's a little bit of an intimacy when you're working remotely. For example, like, just the simple fact, like, basically you're looking into my home right now, that I've tried to configure in a way that puts off a certain vibe or whatever. But I'm looking into your home. We're not just putting on a face at work, where we get to go back to our own lives and do our own things. Like, here we are, we're together. And it's a little bit, I don't know, exposed, I guess, or a little bit, it seems like it could be very personal. Now, I too, I'm just like you in term, and maybe this is an age thing too, but I'm just like you in that I much prefer the in-person stuff. Like I would way rather have an in-person conversation. And in fact, I'm counting down the moments till I have an opportunity to get out to Ireland and actually have this conversation in person with you. But for the short term, I think this is pretty good. So I sort of equate it to like filling a glass of water for satiation, right? And our text messages and our emails are a few little drops in the glass, that sort of thing, and maybe, all the way up to our video call being 80-90% of a full glass of water, right? It's pretty darn good, and we can survive and, be satiated and be happy and continue to work well. But then, when we have that opportunity to get together in person, well, then by God, it's overflowing, right? Now we're stoked. We've got more than we can handle. We have this opportunity to really connect with people. And I think that it all just kind of goes hand in hand. But I think that your
Yeah.
idea of sort of connecting, at least once a year, I know a lot of companies do it quarterly or, biannually. And I don't know that there has to be a specific model, but the idea that despite being remote, we ought to get together on occasion, I think is really critical.
Yeah, and the funny side of being remote as well is you have that awkward 5 minutes of meeting going, wow, you're taller than I expected, or wow, you're shorter than I expected. And then it's like, as you say, the intimacy that is there. So once you get through we're seeing each other face to face, then it's like, how are you? And how's your husband? And how's your, and
Yeah.
it's just a different vibe. And I think it's they talk about how we've been working for so long. It was the Industrial Revolution. Henry Ford, he designed the whole 9 to 5 so we could maximize production, and it was pre-technology. But like technology, I've just put my kids to bed before, and I know it's during the day for you, and this is what technology is allowing us to do. It's to connect and work when it suits our life, and vice versa. And I think it's the potential. Obviously, we have to get through this terrible pandemic, but the upside is companies will hopefully realize that actually, your workers are human. They're human beings. We've just got through a pandemic, and everyone deserves to have a life, a quality life, but also to be productive. That's kind of my hope for.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredible. And, there's been a lot of, pushback recently. I've started to see more and more articles questioning the productivity of remote work, and is it as good as all the hype and all that sort of thing. And I'm sure you can find good cases and bad cases, but it seems to me that everything is working for the better, or that we're on the rise.
Yeah, innovations drop, that's for sure. But I think that's more of a result of what we've all gone through, and the fact that a lot of leaders are not very experienced in this domain. I know we were introduced by a little group of ladies I'm part of. We do this mastermind, and one of the ladies I met, I say ladies, girls, because we still think we're girls. I met her last year, and she had come from a kind of a parallel career path. She'd been leading gig workers, which was relatively new to me, whereas I was more employees. And we realized that actually we had both been leading remote workers. There was lots of sync, but she had been trying to write a book for many years. And I said, well, why don't we write it together from different perspectives for leaders? Because we both acknowledged in the first 3 to 4 years of actually managing remote for the first time, it's actually really daunting. You're constantly questioning yourself. You're wondering, like, are they actually working? Should I be even asking that question? How do I connect with someone? How do I do a review online? How do I recruit remotely? All these questions. Anyway, we dumped it into a book, and I think that's probably where maybe if productivity drops, it's because it's actually more leader orientated than the actual worker. But that's all fixable, but I think this is not the year to really challenge people. I think when we get through the pandemic, that's when it's, how do we make this work?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So the book is called Your Company with No Walls. I'm going to screw up her name if I try and say it though, but do you want to announce your co-author's name?
Yeah, Tiana. So Tiana is living in Brazil, and she has the best life. She kite surfs every day, and I don't know if it's every day, but we'll say every day to make it sound like she's a wonderful life. And, she manages a tech team globally, fully remote, and she's just wonderful. She's got so many hacks around this is what you can do to execute this. And you know, especially for startups that are trying to do it on a tight budget, but get super expertise in to build technology. She kind of has that down pat.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and you know, I too sort of come from that background. And when I first started getting into sort of, I guess what we're calling remote work advocacy, I sort of looked at a disadvantage. Basically, I come from this world where I'm basically a glorified freelancer, right? I mean, we work for these really big companies, but we basically come in and offset ad agencies and things like that and do their you know, large scale work. But as a contractor, we're always that team made apart. We're the guy outside. And so I came into remote work sort of from the perspective more of the contractor or the freelancer and the, you know, the things that a contractor or a freelancer might go through in this space. And it wasn't, you know, like I say, I saw that as a disadvantage. And it wasn't until later that I started to realize that even though I don't necessarily have the same experience in terms of, you know, I don't know, Twitter, and I employ, you know, 100,000 remote workers or something, like I don't have that type of expertise. I found that there's so much crossover and nuance between them that, I mean, the experience that I have is every bit as valuable or interesting, you know, and offers maybe just a different perspective. So I think it's really important that you partner with somebody like Tiana to do a book like this, because, you know, it's good to sort of, I think, see both sides, you know, because the life of the employee versus the life of the freelancer or the gig worker is, you know, a little bit different.
Yeah, and I've been, my eyes have been opened to gig working in the last 12 months. So I've really embraced the model in line with the employee model, and I think it's wonderful. And the talent out there is incredible, but the whole management of it and the project management and that tight management, it's really important. But if you get it right, it's just unbelievable because you've all this expertise coming in, helping your business, but you don't have the weight of salaries and the responsibility from a HR perspective. And I think as a startup, when you're kind of scaling up and down and pivoting, and it's brilliant to have that resource. And then there's the flexibility in some cases to have people who were supporting in a consultant capacity go full time, you know, when the company starts to grow and thrive. So yeah, it's an interesting time. And pre-COVID, they were predicting that 50% of the workforce would be gig working by 2025. I don't know what the pandemic has actually done to those numbers, but that's interesting. And I think as a leader, then if you know that that's where millennials and you know the direction is going, you need to know how to manage both models effectively and in sync.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think that there's just so much range, right, in terms of what people are going to actually want after all this. It's been interesting. You know, I talk to a lot of people who freelance and things like that. And I've come across many who are like, okay, well, now's the time. I need to get a job or something. I got to have some stability. I can't have this thing come and go and ebb and flow all the time. Because essentially when you're a freelancer, you're a business owner, right? You have a very small business, usually a business of one. And the only way to scale is to bring on additional freelancers. And so it starts to, you know, get out of control pretty quickly. And so I've met a number of people who are like, you know, through the pandemic, they, you know, maybe had clients dry up and they're now ready to look for employment. But I would still say the majority of them, you know, are just kind of weathering the storm and still looking for their gig work. But what they like about it, I think, is the same thing that, you know, your traditional remote employee might like. And it's this idea of flexibility. So we talked a little bit about sort of, you know, the future of work and what that might look like. But one of the themes that keeps coming up for me is embracing fluidity and understanding that things need to be able to ebb and flow. I think there's this misconception that is really common among sort of remote work advocates, that they see the future of work as being totally remote. Everybody will be remote. We'll be working from our little pods at home, and that'll just be the world we live in. And I think what most advocates actually lean into, and actually what you were just describing, is this idea of fluidity or flexibility. You know, that maybe a day a week you get to go home, or maybe, you know, whenever you need it, you go home. And when you want to be in the office, you're in the office. And I think that that's one of the big things to try and embrace with, you know, trying to figure out what the new business models look like and figure out where to from here, is this idea of fluidity. And I don't think it's ever been more true, maybe, at least not in our lifetimes, than during this pandemic, you know, and basically having something so large and so, you know, on such a massive scale come in and basically tell you the way things are going to be, regardless of the control you thought you had prior. And so I wondered if you had any thoughts just about sort of fluidity in business models and how we, you know, move forward in a way that works and allows employers to trust, because ultimately that's kind of the thing.
It's really interesting that you say, like, we're not in control right now, because we're not. We listen a lot to the UK radio. My other half it's English, and we're facing England, so we can pick up we can pick the radio up. And a month ago, it was like, Boris and all the politicians were saying, "Get back to the office. London's dying. You need to get back in and spend your money." And like literally 2 days ago, "Go back home. Don't come to the office." So like literally no one is really in control, and this is such a massive experiment, getting people to be fluid day to day, week to week, including governments. And I think it's manageable, but the business practice of like how you measure impact, this idea of presenteeism and clocking in, clocking out, and it has to go. It has to be based on results. I mean, maybe Richard Branson had it right a few years ago. He sort of said, "Look, at Virgin, unlimited holidays, just agree your goals, agree your projects, get them done, and then it's up to you what you do with the rest of the time." And that's really the direction we're going. I think for companies that try and do both, you see this software that's coming in now that can really monitor people at home, and not just, I heard about software the other day that doesn't just monitor when you log in, but like literally your eyeballs, how much you're looking at one screen, how engaged you are. It rates your happiness level. It rates your happiness level. So it's just like there's going to be a fine line, and this is when companies will thrive if they go, "Let's run a fluid model. Let's measure on output. Let's trust, but let's use tools on when we're assessing people on the way in, such as personality, behavioral, cognitive, and use those tools to support the right people to join the organization. For the people that are in the organization already, use those tools to find out who they are, who the leader is that's managing, because it could be the wrong leader now in this new world. You might have to shift that leader into another area, and make sure everyone has the training, the support, the reward mechanisms that works for them. Like, money does not drive me as a dangling up here. There are other things that drive me, but then I know other people that the money is just. So now more than ever, that needs to be established. And I think everything that we used to have in the office, if it was full-time, things can be replicated. Like, I'll just end this answer with one thing I heard about last week. It was an assessment center for a day. So this company is hiring, and we've just taken on Yonder Desk, which is like this cool virtual, I just got a new virtual office. I have a view of a sea bay. It's amazing. And this assessment center, basically people coming in, and you go to the lobby and you go in for your interviews and so on. And then at the end of the day, there was kind of like what would have been the equivalent of like, have a little drink in the bar and then you go home. It's a very cool company. But instead what they arranged for was like food to be delivered to the candidates' homes and a drink. And so everyone joined this virtual room online, and they had their food and their drink. And so they tried their best to replicate what was there already. And I just think like it's that innovation that's going to really set companies apart, and the ones that really care about people and think about how are they feeling.
Well, I think that's so critical, right? It's this idea that we're actually people first, not just saying that out loud to people. And so I think that's really critical. I've actually heard other examples of that. I know of one, and God, I wish I could remember the startup's name so I could plug them. But basically what they did is something like what you described. They sent a package out to every employee, and it said, do not open until X time or whatever. And then, they got on a big group call together, and then everybody got to open their little box at the same time and sort of go through that experience together. So even though they were apart, they were still sort of doing something, in person with one another, that they, as a shared experience being done virtually. And so I thought that was a pretty innovative way of sort of, flexible or, I guess, using the technology, but also sort of leveraging the real life, stuff to bring it all together and sort of allow for a tangible experience in an otherwise intangible world. So I think that's pretty cool. One thing I wanted to talk to you about as it pertains to governments. So, going back to our geognostics technology and mapping of resources, one thing that governments are sort of known for is being, traditionally very slow to pivot and slow to come around to new technologies and new things like that. But they're definitely have been put into a position where all of a sudden they have to make this rapid change. What sorts of problems are you seeing sort of at the governmental level where they're having to make decisions that are, I guess, forcing their hand into being a little bit more flexible and a little bit more, move a little bit more quickly into these new, I guess, post-COVID times?
I would think that the speed of which they've had to execute grants has been phenomenal, because businesses needed help really quickly. And in some cases, certainly at ministerial level, they were releasing grants within sort of, 24 hours, but then they were having to actually administer those grants within a few weeks. Some governments were great at doing it, other governments not so much. The digital transformation for a lot of them was really challenging. A lot of them had the BYOD, bring your own device to work. So when people went remote from a security perspective, that was huge. I think where I would commend them, obviously I'm going to commend the governments that are working with us for mapping, because I'm like, you are so futuristic. You're seeing the potential. You're seeing like not only being able to compete for jobs globally, but attract back talented diaspora, because that's a huge asset to any region, to get people back that are now internationally skilled. So I would commend any of the governments, but the other one is around upskilling. So a lot of governments now are realizing actually people are at home, certainly if they're not working or they're working less, now is the time to upskill them against what is the skills gap of today and tomorrow. And what's nice is actually we're starting to map the skills of people, what they're putting in versus what industry are saying they want. And we can see trends of gaps where education can be plugged in now and universities can pivot. So in fact, speaking of universities, we're starting to partner with universities because this is data intelligence they really want. And they want to know what industry is demanding and then meet that need more so now than ever, because they're under pressure. People don't necessarily want to, especially international students, travel and attend a university in another country when you can do it remotely. And then why would you pay 10, 20, 50,000 a year for that? So even that model, there's a huge shift. But I think from a government perspective, they're now realizing that one of their greatest assets are the people. And what can you do to upskill them and connect them with opportunities?
Yeah, well, and like we've talked about, I mean, opportunity is really the name of the game here, right? There's so many new opportunities that I think that, at the government level, especially having the wherewithal to start looking at this stuff is really critical. It's interesting you mentioned colleges because, yeah, obviously, I mean, from a recruiting standpoint, their ability to help put graduates into positions is something that, it could be a selling point if you're trying to get someone to come to your campus. And, so obviously having some idea of where, the needs are so that they can tailor their programs and things to fit, I think makes a lot of sense too. That was one I hadn't thought of. One of the things I wanted to discuss too about just sort of, how people might use a recruitment platform like Abodoo is finding cultural fit. So maybe we've spent a little bit of time talking about it from sort of the employee side, but maybe more on the employer side. If you're trying to, I guess, communicate your cultural values through a platform like this, and then match somebody against those cultural values based on theirs, how do we do that sort of thing? I mean, at least as a sort of pre-qualification step, when you're looking to hire somebody, obviously cultural fit is a big deal. And I wonder how much of that you can facilitate through your platform.
Well, having been in recruitment quite some time, before even Abodoo, I feel like the match between a person and a company is actually down to the intrinsic connection of like their personality, behavior, cognitive, and then the experience, and then the education. And it takes a while with hiring managers to kind of talk that through. But if you actually assess the top performers in companies, there's a trait or a trend that you'll see for that particular company of like the same personality profile will get it to the top or get to the top 5 to 10 positions. So that means that if someone has that behavior in that culture, they thrive. So when we're building Abodoo, I mean, bearing in mind we're 2.5 years old, so we have a lot of plans around our technology, but as it stands right now, people can identify and put what their core values are, or their soft skills is another term. And companies then equally on their side, when they're inputting the skills that they want, the next thing is they'll highlight the core values that are within the culture of the company. And the matching algorithm does match this. There is a certain weight to it. So it influences the match. And the way the match works in Abodoo is that both sides will only see a 50% plus match. So that experience of being on job boards and just like screening through loads of applications, or from a recruitment manager perspective, especially now more than ever, when you're getting hundreds of applications, you just get exhausted. Like you miss the good people or the diamonds in the rough because you just don't have capacity. So the idea of like the way we've built technology is both sides gets an alert over 50%. It's percentage rank. So, I have an 87% match, a bit like a dating website. And then I can see, like it's company X. I'd like to go into process. But you are anonymous at that point in time. So the company has to decide to invite you in based on purely skill matching. And then they see your age, sex, ethnicity. So hopefully it just makes it a little bit more welcoming for diverse talent, whatever your diverse is.
Yeah, one of the particular diversities that I think is interesting and seem to be often overlooked as it pertains to remote work, at least in a superficial kind of way, is it seems like ageism really can exist in this environment. People have these ideas, and maybe lesser with more mature companies, but with new companies especially, they're looking for the new college grads, they're looking for these kind of people, and it seems like people maybe even my age or slightly older, might have more trouble applying for a remote position than another. So I think that's really interesting what you're doing there, because I think, we get really caught up in, maybe racial differences or religious differences, and these being factors that people are discriminated by. But, I think a lot of times we overlook age, and especially in a really tech forward world where basically the assumptions are old people don't know technology. It does seem to lend itself to some ageism there. So I think that's a really interesting thing that you're working around.
Yeah, you're really right around the age. Even when I was in recruitment in my 20s, and not that it would ever be put on a job ad or any publicity, but I would get briefs from managers specifying age profile, and over, dare to say, I'm nearly at the age that they used to say was that was the top. Don't bring me in over that age. And I look at it now and I think that is just terrible. And certainly the experience, the weight of experience that you have by the time you hit your 30s and 40s, it's phenomenal. And I don't know, certainly since we've had kids, I have a whole new ability to manage time that I didn't have many years ago. That is priceless, So companies are shooting themselves in the foot if they think that way. Having said that, though, I know I'm on the borderline millennial, supposedly, and I just keep up with technology. But there are kids coming through. When I say kids in their 20s, I'm like, wow. So I think what's important is like to provide the skills training that you need to stay ahead. Yeah. That's the company's responsibility, I feel, for people. And people are very willing to invest time to have strong careers into their 60s and say, we're all going to live longer, touch wood, so it's important that we're not just forgotten at a certain age. And that's why we built Abodoo, for that match. It's like, well, match on skill, and then if you're going to discriminate, it's going to be obvious.
Yeah, no, I think that's so great because, I know especially for older people, and maybe if the technology is a little overwhelming, but maybe they have years of people management experience, or maybe they have characteristics that would make them a great employee. However, you just scrub them off because you don't think they can learn how to run Slack very well or something. It's like, I feel like we can train our people to do those things. So I think that's kind of an innovative way of looking at, employment, is this, not giving people all these extra factors to judge on. Basically, this person is capable of doing the work you want. Who that person is, you can figure all that out later. So I think that's a really smart approach.
Thanks. Yeah, and hopefully, look, the proof's in the pudding. More and more companies, as they take on people from diverse backgrounds, it's proven. Geez, the P&L goes up. It's just, you have to take the leap of faith. And I think a lot of companies talk about having diversity and inclusion, but you can't be fully diverse and inclusive if your recruitment process is biased through it. It has to be from the first touch point of a candidate right through to onboarding, right through to succession planning and exiting, the whole thing. But it's happening. And I think, like, outside of COVID-19, the next thing that's on people's minds is equality and, inclusion. So that's what and the environment, like they're the three big things right now, that on post-COVID, the world will be very different.
Well, an environment is one of those things that I don't think gets touched on quite enough, because I don't think people stop and measure that impact. I think it's really easy for us to get our blinders on and think about just our corporate needs, right? Like our business's bottom line and things like that. We're not really thinking about this sort of, I don't know, more altruistic, the footprint we're leaving, by having our 200 people drive into an office or, all these different things. And so I think that, that's maybe one of the under marketed things. It ends up coming off as like this little add-on that people in the remote industry throw out there. But I think that making that a bit of a focus, I think for most people who are trying to do good, I think that that's a great selling point to think of too.
Yeah, and you just quoted there like a 200 workforce office. That equates to 9,200 metric tons of carbon emissions every year. So it's just phenomenal. And I think that generations are coming through where for a lot of, keep saying kids, make me sound old, but for a lot of people in their 20s, that's just, I've done interviews in the last week and I've just been blown away, or my heart's grown, because as I'm interviewing them, they've researched Abodoo and they're talking about the fact like we're actively trying to tick 3 boxes of the UN sustainability goals. We tick 7 in total. Our mission is, if people have connectivity, we want to help them get discovered. We want to help governments reboot. We have a lot of missions and values. They've read them all, and they're there telling me the calculations because they care. They really care, and they want to work for something that has a mission rather than just a job for 20 years or even 2 years. It's like, what difference, what impact can they make? And I did an interview today with a lady, and she wouldn't even know, like I'm talking about her now, but she just blew me away, early 20s, but it was just in her eyes, just that light of, making a change in the world. And I was like, I have to have you.
Yeah.
People like that are just amazing. And I think that's the shift that we'll make in our working world. We'll say, look, I want to work with people that are going to inspire and change rather than just processors,
Well, I think that's the thing, right? I mean, so many of us, you hear people talk about work and all these things that we all take pride and we're so happy in our work and all this kind of stuff. But if you really think about work, we work, most of us, as a means to an end. We have to pay rent, we have to do whatever. And if you take this sort of back, all the way back to sort of industrial revolution or whatever, people were working because they had to, not because they wanted to. And I think you're seeing this shift, especially for younger people, and I think you make a good point or show a good example with what you were just describing, which is that, yes, this person needs to pay rent and, they want to be able to go hang out on the weekends with their friends. So they need to make some income or whatever, but they have the liberty, because so many companies are sort of pivoting and becoming a little more conscious. They have the liberty to look for the company that best aligns with them on, these other factors that don't really have that much to do with what you're paying or where you're located. And, and you're giving people the opportunity to actually just kind of pursue happiness by way of work rather than, taking a job because you have to, and hopefully you have some pride in the work you're doing.
It's true. And now you've made me want to go and see that Will Smith film, like Pursuit of Happiness, because it is. It's I go back to that thing of one life. I've been listening to the podcast of Rich Roll a lot, and people that are coming in and they've pivoted their own lives through experiences and just they're on this path that is incredible, and it makes you realize like you can either just kind of go through life and not really live, or make huge changes and ensure that every day you're just doing something that's fulfilling you, whatever it might be, whether it's in fitness, your job, and I think more and more people want that. And I guess with remote work, you get more choice now, and hopefully people will start to just get to really live fulfilling lives. And instead of being on this rat wheel of like getting the car, 10 hours a week and to pay the bills.
Well, and that's the thing. I think there's a real push, and I think it was driven initially up by maybe younger generations of people into companies, where companies are now saying, okay, now we've got to try and evolve and be more people centric, because if we want the best talent, this is what we have to do. Now we have to compete for you. And I think that all that is leading to this thing. Obviously in Team Made Apart, and then also in the work that we do in our agency, the human relationship is like the most important thing, right? That's, the lens that we view everything we do through is how can we develop a better relationship? And and it's a little cliche to say it, but everybody that you talk to, if you look for anybody who's sort of achieved, I guess, quote unquote, happiness, it's not work. It's not the time they spent away from people that they loved. It's not the time they spent, doing any of that kind of stuff. It's the time they spent out at the lake with their family, or it's the time that they went on this vacation with their friends, or, whatever it is, but it's always that, right? It's always the relationships. It's always that stuff. And I think the more that we can work towards that in our workplaces and find companies that align with us sort of in terms of our interests or our desires, and sort of, I guess, facilitate this ability to foster great relationships both directions, between both the employer and the employee. I think ultimately we're going to get closer to what, you might consider happiness, even if you still have to pay rent.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think about all the fun things that I've got to see in the last 6 months with the kids being around, and there's situations like the BBC interview of them running in and you're on an important call, and now that's just a given every day. You expect a kid to run into the background and ask
my phone's sitting here buzzing right now, getting texts from my kid. Hey, are you going to come get me? Or so no, I think that's incredible. Well, and hey, I think that's probably an okay place to wrap us up too. We're getting to the end of the show. Let's just, I guess, for sort of parting shots, anything else you'd like to share about Abodoo? And then outside of that, let's, just where can people track you down? How can they learn more about the work you're doing, either at Abodoo or personally? And how might they connect?
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think for anyone listening right now that feels like, geez, I want to bring opportunities to where we are, and they can connect Abodoo with their local government, their heads of economic development, do the introduction. You can reach us at info@abodoo.com, ABODOO.com. For people that want to be discovered, can't guarantee you'll be a match to a company, but if you're on Abodoo with your skills profile, you're there. So you've increased your chances just by being on there. And then for businesses, it's free, and there's talent in 62 countries registering right now. So it's a no-brainer. Register and post. Don't pay a job board. If people want to find out more information, we have a blog and we have a newsletter. So subscribe on abodoo.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a profile up there. It's Vanessa Tierney. And just like a parting words, we've had this motto for years and years since we started. So life is a journey, not a commute. And I just wish everyone well, and thanks for listening.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. Like I said at the top, I'm very grateful we were able to connect and make this happen. Thrilled to death to have shared this conversation. And I think you're working on some really meaningful and impactful stuff. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I really, really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And thanks also to everybody who tunes in this week and every week. And we'll see you all next time.